Imagine silence. Not the kind of silence that falls over a city at night, broken by a distant hum and the occasional siren. Imagine the absolute, all-pervading silence of space. But even in this void, there is music. The music of the spheres, as the ancients would have said. For us, the people of the 21st century, this music is a continuous stream of data, telemetry, billions of packets of information that paint a portrait of our planet every second. The temperature of the oceans, the movement of tectonic plates, the composition of the atmosphere. And among these streams, there is one, the most important, the most fundamental. It is the beating heart of our world. The data from the magnetometers. They measure the pulse of our planetary shield. This shield, the magnetosphere, is our invisible ocean, an atmosphere of force lines, a planetary immune system forged in the liquid metal heart of the world. It extends for tens of thousands of kilometers, tens of thousands of miles, into space, deflecting the relentless storm of the solar wind. A stream of charged particles capable of stripping the atmosphere and sterilizing the surface of any unprotected planet. We live and thrive in this quiet bubble, shielded from cosmic radiation, unaware of the furious storm raging just a few thousand kilometers above our heads. We have come to consider this shield eternal, unshakable, a constant. But on October 27, 2025, at 3:11 a.m. Coordinated Universal Time, the system officially admitted that a crack had appeared in our armor, and that crack is growing fast. It all began in a sterile, brightly lit conference room at the European Space Operations Center in Darmstadt, Germany. The air was electric with anticipation, mixed with the smell of stale coffee and the faint hum of cooling systems keeping the servers alive, servers that hold the secrets of the solar system. On the podium stood Dr. Elise Renaud, lead geophysicist of the European Space Agency's Swarm mission. Her face, usually lively and expressive, was a mask of professional calm. Behind her, on a giant screen, hung a map of the world, but not the map we're used to. Instead of continents and oceans, it showed the intensity of Earth's magnetic field. Most of the planet was painted in reassuring shades of green and blue. But over South America and the Atlantic Ocean, a huge, unsettling crimson stain was spreading. The South Atlantic Anomaly. As you know, Dr. Renaud began in a steady, well-practiced voice, the South Atlantic Anomaly is a long-known phenomenon. It is a region where the inner Van Allen radiation belt comes closest to the Earth's surface due to the asymmetry of the planetary dipole. Today, we are publishing a report based on the analysis of data from the last 5 years, obtained from our Swarm satellite constellation. Our data confirms the continued weakening and expansion of the anomaly. She paused, letting the phrase hang in the air. Camera shutters clicked in the hall. A new image appeared on the screen. An animation showing the crimson spot slowly but inexorably spreading, like a sinister bruise on the body of the planet. Furthermore, Renaud continued, we are observing a clear separation of the anomaly into 2 distinct centers, or lobes. One is concentrated over southwestern Africa, the other over South America. The drift rate of the western lobe is approximately 20 kilometers, about 12 miles, per year, while the field intensity in the center of the anomaly has dropped to a record low of 22,000 nanoteslas. This was the official version. Dry, calibrated, clad in the armor of scientific terminology. The system was speaking to us in the language of numbers and graphs. It spoke of complex processes in the core, of secular variation of the geomagnetic field, of a precursor to a possible magnetic pole reversal. We were told that this was a natural, albeit complex process, a slow, majestic dance of molten iron in the planet's core that occurs once every few 100,000 years. Journalists asked predictable questions. Does this threaten aviation? Will it affect satellite operations? When should we expect the next field inversion? And for every question, they received equally predictable, reassuring answers. No, there's no direct threat to life on Earth. Yes, satellites passing through the anomaly are exposed to increased radiation, but this is accounted for in their design. An inversion? Perhaps in a few thousand years? Nothing to worry about. Go back to your lives. Science is in control. But while the world listened to these soothing words, I wasn't looking at Dr. Renault's face. I was looking at a graph they showed for only a few seconds. A graph of the rate of change. And this is where the official version began to crack. Because the main event wasn't the expansion of the anomaly itself. The main event was its unprecedented exponential speed. A process that should have taken centuries was happening in decades. What should have taken decades was happening in months. The system was describing a symptom, but remained silent about the cause of such feverish dynamics. They told us it was normal, but in the data, in the very steepness of that curve, a silent question screamed out, why? And why now? This was the first crack in the wall of the official narrative. But on that day, October 27th, another event occurred. A quiet one, unnoticed by most. An event that didn't make the headlines. On that very same day, thousands of kilometers from Earth, in the cold void beyond the orbit of Mars, the interstellar object 3I Atlas crossed the ecliptic plane. This was not just a rock hurtling through our system. Since its discovery 2 years ago, 3I Atlas had been a mystery wrapped in an anomaly. It was discovered by the Atlas Automated Sky Survey in Hawaii. At first, it was classified as a comet, but it behaved incorrectly. Its non-gravitational acceleration, a slight deviation from its trajectory caused by outgassing, was tens of times stronger than that of any known comet. Yet telescopes detected no visible coma, the cloud of dust and gas that should have caused such acceleration. It moved as if it had its own engine, but that engine was invisible. Spectral analysis revealed the presence of heavy metals that shouldn't exist in an icy body from the Oort cloud. Its trajectory was hyperbolic, meaning it came from interstellar space. But it didn't point back to any known star. It came from a patch of sky that appeared completely empty. 3I Atlas was a ghost, a cosmic sphinx that asked questions but gave no answers. The scientific community was divided. Some insisted it was just a very strange comet with a unique composition, perhaps with outgassing of invisible hydrogen. Others, like Professor Avi Loeb of Harvard, dared to suggest we were seeing technology, an artifact. But on that day, October 27th, all disputes faded into the background. Because the object, moving at an incredible speed, performed a key maneuver in its trajectory. It entered the inner solar system, beginning its final approach to Earth. 2 events. On the same day. On Earth. The official admission that our shield is weakening at an alarming rate. In space, an interstellar wanderer begins its final run towards our planet. A coincidence? Or choreography? The system wanted us to believe in a coincidence, in the random overlap of 2 independent astronomical and geophysical phenomena. They invited us to look down, deep into the planet, to seek answers in the turbulent flows of molten metal, in the slow dance of geological time. It was convenient. It was safe. It preserved the familiar picture of the world. But I did what they didn't want me to. I took the map of the South Atlantic Anomaly's expansion, provided by the European Space Agency itself, and I superimposed the orbital plane of Object 3I Atlas onto it. It was at that moment that a slight unease turned into chilling horror, the vector of the anomaly's expansion. The very line along which the western lobe was spreading the very axis along which the magnetic field was thinning fastest. It wasn't random. It wasn't directed chaotically. It was pointed upward, into space, and it aligned with mathematical surgical precision with the plane along which 3I Atlas was approaching us. The anomaly wasn't just growing, it was reaching. It was reaching out to meet it. Correlation does not imply causation. This is the mantra scientists repeat to avoid the sin of apophenia, finding patterns in random noise. But when one unprecedented anomaly points to another with such impeccable precision, when the timelines coincide down to a single day, ignoring this connection is no longer scientific caution. It is willful denial. It is choosing not to see. At that moment, I realized that the press conference in Darmstadt was not an act of scientific transparency. It was a smokescreen, the architecture of a cover-up. They gave us part of the truth, the part that could no longer be hidden because data was leaking from independent observatories and even amateur radio operators. They admitted the shield was weakening, but they remained silent about the most important thing. They didn't answer the question why, because the answer could destroy everything. It could plunge the world into the very chaos they were trying so hard to prevent. The official version stated, complex processes in the Earth's core. It sounded solid, scientific, irrefutable. Who among us can peer into the planet's core and check? But they were urging us to look in the wrong direction. While all of humanity, hypnotized by the authority of science, stared into the depths of the Earth, the true cause of the unfolding catastrophe was silently and swiftly approaching us from the icy darkness of interstellar space. They blamed it on geology, but the numbers didn't speak of geology. They spoke of geometry, of a vector, of intent. And this was no longer a mistake in their calculations. This was their choice. They told us a story about a slow sickness in our world. But what if it's not a sickness? What if it's a hack? A targeted weakening of our only defense before a quiet and inexorable invasion. To find the first crack in the monolithic wall of the official version, you didn't need to hack secret servers or recruit insiders. You just had to do what our information-overloaded civilization never has time for. You had to stop and carefully read what they themselves gave us. The architecture of a lie is always built on a foundation of half-truths, and its weak point is not what is said, but what is deafeningly left unsaid. The official report from the European Space Agency was a masterpiece of managed transparency. Dozens of pages filled with graphs, formulas, and satellite images. It was designed to inspire awe and trust. To make the average person, after flipping through it, feel both a part of great science and simultaneously too insignificant to ask questions. But I'm not an average person. I'm a digital archaeologist. And I wasn't looking for answers. I was looking for the seams. The places where different fragments of the narrative were glued together. Imagine a digital ocean. The public data archive of the Swarm mission. This isn't just a website. It's a colossal, structured library containing petabytes of raw telemetry. Each data packet is a tiny snapshot of the magnetosphere's state at a specific point in space and time. To get the full picture, you need to assemble billions of these snapshots. The system kindly provides us with already processed, averaged, and beautifully visualized products. Maps, graphs, animations. It's like a restaurant serving you a finished dish. But I wanted to get into the kitchen. I wanted to see the raw ingredients. I started the download. Terabyte by terabyte. The planetary electrocardiogram for the last 10 years. It was methodical, almost meditative work. Hours spent writing scripts that sifted through this digital sand, filtering out noise and artifacts, building an independent model. I compared data from the 3 Swarm satellites, as well as data from their predecessors, the Champ and Ørsted missions, to build the longest and most detailed timeline possible. And it was here, in the cold, impartial logic of numbers, that the official version began to crumble. The system told us about complex processes in the core. Let's accept this version for a moment and dive into it. It's the most convenient hypothesis because it's completely unverifiable by direct observation. We know less about the Earth's core than we do about the surface of distant stars. All we have are models built on indirect data, mainly from the analysis of seismic waves. According to these models, our magnetic field is generated by a mechanism known as the geodynamo. Imagine a giant ball of liquid iron and nickel, larger than Mars, spinning at the center of our planet. Due to the temperature difference between the inner solid core and the outer mantle, giant convective currents arise in this liquid ocean. Molten metal rises, cools, and sinks. These currents, twisted by the Coriolis force from the Earth's rotation, act like a giant dynamo, creating electrical currents that, in turn, generate the magnetic field. It's an elegant, beautiful theory. It explains almost everything: the existence of the field, its dipolar nature, and even the periodic pole reversals. According to this model, the South Atlantic Anomaly is the result of a local anomaly in these flows. Perhaps somewhere deep beneath the South Atlantic, a giant vortex has formed, flowing in the opposite direction, creating a patch of reverse polarity at the core mantle boundary. This reverse flow weakens the main field, projecting onto the surface as that very crimson zone. And the expansion and drift of the anomaly are simply a reflection of the slow, chaotic dance of these flows deep inside the planet. Everything is logical. Everything is scientific. But there is one problem. One fundamental, unsolvable problem. Time. The processes in the Earth's core are incredibly inert. Liquid iron has colossal viscosity and heat capacity. The speeds of convective flows there, by the most optimistic estimates, do not exceed a few millimeters per second. That's slower than a snail crawls. Any changes in such a system occur on geological timescales, hundreds, thousands of years. Official science itself tells us that a full pole inversion cycle takes from 1,000 to 10,000 years. The secular variation, the slow change of the field, is measured in units and tens of nanoteslas per year. This is an established, accepted fact. Now let's go back to the data I extracted from the raw archives. Not the pretty average graphs from the press release, but the daily, hourly measurements. In the center of the South Atlantic Anomaly, at its weakest point, the rate of field strength decline over the last 2 years was not tens of nanoteslas per year. It was hundreds. In some months, especially in the last 6, I recorded peaks where the field weakened by tens of nanoteslas per week. This was not a geological change. This was a hemorrhage. It was as if a glacier that should move a few centimeters a year suddenly started racing like a sports car. The energy required to change the magnetic field of an entire region of the planet so quickly is colossal. To produce such a change through internal core processes is as impossible as boiling the ocean with a single match. The chaotic, slow flows of liquid metals simply cannot physically reorganize themselves so rapidly. It would violate the laws of hydrodynamics and thermodynamics. This was the first gaping hole in the official version. The speed. The insane, impossible speed. The system knew this. They could not have known. Their own satellites recorded it. But in their public report, they did something very clever. They presented data averaged over 5 years. On a long timeline, this exponential surge of recent months was smoothed out, turning into a more decent, more plausible curve. They didn't lie. They just didn't show the whole truth. They hid the most alarming piece of the picture in the statistical noise. And this was no longer scientific caution. This was manipulation. So if the cause is not in the core, then where is it? If the energy to weaken the shield is not coming from within, it must be coming from without. This thought was heretical. It contradicted everything we had been taught. We were taught that the magnetosphere is armor deflecting external influences. But what if there's a way not to break this armor, but to hack it from the inside, to make it weaken itself? I started digging, not in recent publications, but in old, archived journals, in papers the scientific community had deemed too speculative, too on the fringe. And I found it. An article published in 1997 in a little-known geophysical journal. Its author was a maverick American geophysicist, Dr. Alastair Finch, from Lawrence Livermore National Laboratory. His work was titled, "On the Possibility of Inducing Local Magnetospheric Instabilities via Resonant Interaction with Heavy Ion Fluxes." In the 90s, his theory was ridiculed. It was considered science fiction. Finch proposed that if a focused beam of certain heavy ions possessing specific energy and frequency were directed at the magnetosphere, a resonance could be triggered. Not in the magnetosphere itself, but in the conductive layers of the upper atmosphere, and perhaps even deeper, in the mantle. He wrote that the magnetosphere is not a static wall, but a complex vibrating system like a piano string. And if you find the right note, the right frequency, and play it long enough, you could trigger a cascade effect, local heating of the ionized layers of the atmosphere, the emergence of anomalous ring currents that would begin to generate their own magnetic field, opposing the Earth's main field. In essence, Finch described the theoretical possibility of creating an artificial magnetic anomaly. He wrote that there are no natural sources of such focused heavy ion fluxes in nature, so his work remained a purely theoretical exercise. But today, we have 3I Atlas, an object that shows no visible coma but demonstrates powerful non-gravitational acceleration. What if it's not ejecting gas? What if its invisible engine is a particle accelerator, emitting a perfectly calibrated beam of the very heavy ions Finch wrote about? What if it's not just flying by? What if it's working, purposefully playing on the strings of our magnetic field, weakening it at a pre-selected point, the point we call the South Atlantic Anomaly? This hypothesis explained everything. It explained the impossible speed of the changes, because the energy was coming from an external source. It explained the precise alignment of the anomaly's expansion vector with the object's orbit, because the beam was hitting its target precisely. It even explained the existence of the anomaly itself. Perhaps it's simply the weakest, most vulnerable spot in our defenses, the perfect place to start the hack. And the most terrifying part? This hypothesis explained the behavior of the system. Imagine you are the head of a space agency. Your satellites show you that the planetary shield is collapsing with incredible speed. Your astronomers tell you that the vector of destruction points directly at a strange interstellar object of artificial appearance. What do? Tell the truth? Announce to the world that our only defense against deadly cosmic radiation is being systematically dismantled by an unknown force? It would cause panic on a scale humanity has never known. The collapse of the economy, social chaos, wars over resources and safe zones. No, you don't tell the truth. You create another story, a convenient, calming story about complex processes in the core. You publish beautiful, averaged graphs. You cite slow, geological processes. You do everything you can to buy time, to hide the truth, not because you are evil, but because you are afraid. Afraid that the truth will be more terrifying than any lie. The issue wasn't that their model was wrong. The issue was that they ignored the data that contradicted it. They saw the same exponential curve that I did. They saw the same alignment of vectors, and they made their choice. They decided that humanity was not ready to know, and that is no longer a mistake. It is a choice. And now we know that the first crack appeared not only in the Earth's magnetic field, It appeared in the wall of silence that surrounded us, and through it, the chilling light of a new, horrifying reality began to break. If the first crack in the official story was a question of physics, an impossible rate of change, then the second was a question of protocol. Pure, cold, soulless bureaucracy. And as is often the case, the most terrifying secrets are hidden in the most boring, most regulated procedures. To understand what happened next, you need to imagine not a spaceship, but a giant, faceless library, an archive, the ESA Geodata Hub. It's not just a repository, it's a living organism, a digital nervous system that absorbs, processes, and catalogs streams of telemetry from dozens of satellites in real time. This organism has its laws, its rituals, its unbreakable rules. Rule number 1, data must flow. Information cannot simply disappear. Every bit received from orbit goes through a strict, automated chain. First, it's level 0, the raw, unpacked radio signal full of interference and noise. Then it passes through software filters and calibrations, becoming level 1, cleaned, physically meaningful values. Field strength in nanoteslas, satellite coordinates, a precise timestamp. Finally, this data is aggregated, interpolated, and turned into level 2, the finished scientific products, the very same beautiful maps they show us at press conferences. This entire process, from receiving the signal to publishing level 1 data in the public domain, usually takes no more than 24 hours. This isn't just tradition, it's a technical necessity. Scientists around the world rely on this speed for space weather forecasting, for calibrating their own instruments. A delay in this pipeline isn't just an inconvenience, it's an alarming symptom. It's as if blood stopped flowing to a part of the body. I knew the press conference took place on October 27th. Logic suggested that the most important, most anomalous data that triggered it must have been received just before that date. My goal was simple: find and analyze the raw level 1 data from the magnetometers of all 3 swarm satellites for the 72 hours preceding Dr. Renault's speech, from October 24th to October 27th. I focused on the time window when the satellites were passing over the epicenter of the South Atlantic Anomaly. I entered the parameters into the search form: date, instrument, geographical coordinates. I pressed enter, and I waited for the system to sift through petabytes of information. But instead of a stream of numbers, a message appeared on the screen: dry, impersonal, systemic. No results found. I checked again. Maybe I made a mistake in the query. I widened the time range, still empty. I removed the geographical filter requesting all data for that period, and this is where it got truly strange. The data was there. Telemetry streams from the swarm satellites for those 3 days were present in the archive, but only until their orbits approached the South Atlantic. The very moment a satellite was supposed to enter the anomaly zone, the data stream from its magnetometer simply cut off. And then, when the satellite emerged from the other side, the stream resumed as if nothing had happened. Between 2 segments of perfect, clean data, there was a hole, a gap, a perfectly delineated zone of digital silence, its contours precisely matching the boundaries of the anomaly. Imagine an ancient manuscript with the most important page torn out, or an audio recording of a confession with the key answer edited out. It was exactly like that. The absence of data was so eloquent, so deafening that it screamed louder than any numbers. 72 hours, 3 satellites, dozens of passes over the most geophysically interesting region of the planet, and not a single byte of data. Let's play devil's advocate again. What could be the official, rational explanations? First, a technical failure of the satellite itself. Perhaps upon entering the zone of increased radiation, which the anomaly is, the instruments failed. This is plausible. But then why did the failure occur on all three satellites simultaneously and synchronously? They fly at different altitudes and in different orbits. The probability of a simultaneous identical equipment failure on three independent spacecraft approaches 0. Moreover, I checked the telemetry of the satellite's other systems. Their onboard computers, orientation systems, and temperature sensors were all working perfectly. Only one single instrument was failing, the magnetometer, and only over the anomaly. Second explanation, a failure at the receiving station on Earth. Perhaps the tracking station responsible for that region went down at that exact moment. Also possible. But there are redundancies for such cases. Data is not transmitted to a single point. It is duplicated through a global network of stations. Losing data from all three satellites for 3 days due to a ground infrastructure failure in the 21st century is practically impossible. The third, most plausible explanation, the data was received but was so corrupted or noisy that the automated processing system rejected it as low quality. This is a standard procedure. But here too, protocol requires that even rejected, dirty data be stored in a special section of the archive, marked as low quality. For researchers, even noisy data can contain valuable information. I checked those sections. They were empty. Nothing. Not a single trace. The data wasn't lost. It wasn't corrupted. It was deleted with surgical precision, as if someone had gone through the archive with a digital scalpel and excised the very fragment of reality we were not supposed to see. And this leads us to the only remaining conclusion. The data gap is not a technical error. It is a conscious policy decision. Someone at a very high level in the European Space Agency gave the order to quarantine this data, to hide it from the public. Because what they saw in that data was so anomalous, so shocking, and so contradictory to the official story of processes in the core that its publication would have triggered an immediate flood of questions they had no answers for. Or rather, they had an answer, but they didn't dare to voice it. What if they found something and hid it from us? At that moment, the investigation shifted from analysis to reconstruction. If you can't see the evidence, you must reconstruct it from the shadows it casts. What could their satellites have seen in those 3 missing days? What could have forced an entire space agency to commit an unprecedented act of censorship, violating its own fundamental principles of data openness? It couldn't have been just a confirmation that the field was weakening faster than expected. That would be alarming, but it wouldn't require such drastic measures. It means they saw not a quantitative, but a qualitative change. They saw something that didn't fit into any existing model. Let's return to Dr. Finch's hypothesis: resonance. He wrote that an external source, playing at the right frequency, could induce responsive oscillations in the magnetosphere. What if the swarm satellites recorded exactly that? What if, during those 72 hours, the drop in field strength was not monotonic, not smooth, but pulsating? What if their ultra-sensitive magnetometers recorded not just the noise of a geomagnetic storm, but a rhythm? A structured, repeating signal superimposed on the general background of weakening. Not chaotic fluctuations, but coherent oscillations. Not a natural process, but an artificial pattern. This would be irrefutable proof of external influence. It would be the digital signature, the smoking gun, that proved the South Atlantic Anomaly is not just a hole. It is a point of contact, a place where an unknown force is actively interacting with our planet. The existence of such a pattern would explain everything. It would explain the panic at ESA. It would explain the data quarantine. It would explain the hastily convened press conference with its vague story about processes in the core. It was a cover-up operation on a planetary scale. The silence in the archive was not accidental. It was the answer. The answer to what the swarm's satellites heard in those 3 missing days. They heard a heartbeat inside the anomaly. I almost gave up. It felt like I had hit a solid wall erected by bureaucracy and fear. The data was classified, and I had no way to get it. But the ghost in the machine always leaves a trail. A system that hides information is itself a complex information system. And in its metadata, in its service logs, in its error reports, one can find a reflection of what it conceals. I stopped looking for the data itself. I started looking for the traces of its deletion. I delved into the darkest, most boring corner of any digital archive, the system event logs. These are terabytes of service information, understandable only to system administrators. User X performed Operation Y on File Z. 99.9% of this information is useless noise. But somewhere in that ocean of technical jargon, I hope to find a pearl. And I found it. In a log file from one of the data processing servers, dated October 26, 2025, the day before the press conference. There was a line, a single line, generated by an automated quality analysis system. It pertained to a data packet that never appeared in the public domain. And it read, Event ID 734, data packet S1MAG 1B 2025126T142205. Quality flag, red. Reason, non-correlating, non-stochastic resonant pattern detected. Data quarantine pending level 4 manual verification. Non-stochastic. That means non-random. A resonant pattern. This was it. The admission? An admission made not by a human, but by a machine simply following its algorithm. The system itself, in its own internal report, had confirmed my wildest suspicions. They didn't just hide the data. They hid the proof that our planetary shield isn't just dying. It's being killed. And the silence they created wasn't to calm us. It was so we wouldn't hear the drums of war. The machine left a ghost, a digital fingerprint at the scene of the crime. Non-stochastic resonant pattern. This phrase, buried in the depths of a system log, was the proof. But it was proof without a body, a ghost without flesh. I knew what they were hiding, but I couldn't see it. I couldn't show it to you. I could only describe the empty room, point to the excised fragment of reality, and ask you to take my word for it. But faith is the territory of religion. We are in the territory of an investigation. I needed a witness. I needed someone who was standing outside that locked room when the crime was committed and heard the scream. I needed an oracle. In our stories, the oracle is not a mystical figure uttering vague prophecies. The oracle is an archetype. It is an independent observer, a person or group of people standing outside the system, unbound by its protocols, its hierarchy, its fears. They don't look through the same telescopes as NASA. They don't analyze the same data streams as ESA. They build their own instruments. They look where professionals are told not to look. They listen on frequencies the system considers noise. And that is precisely why they sometimes see and hear what the system is desperately trying to ignore or hide. While I was chasing ghosts in the archives of the European Space Agency, such an oracle already existed. It was not a lone figure, but a decentralized global network. They called themselves the Argus Array. The name was a reference to the all-seeing hundred-eyed giant of Greek mythology, and it was an incredibly accurate description. Argus was not an official organization. It had no headquarters, no budget, no press secretary. It was a fellowship of radio engineers, amateur physicists, retired military communications specialists, and simply obsessed enthusiasts from all over the world. They were united by one passion, listening to the whispers of the planet. They didn't build giant radio telescopes to gaze at distant galaxies. Their domain was very low frequency, VLF. This is the very bottom of the radio spectrum, frequencies from 3 to 30 kilohertz. No radio stations broadcast on these waves. No mobile phones operate here. This is the world of natural electromagnetic phenomena. Whistlers, signals from distant lightning strikes that, traveling along the Earth's magnetic field lines, stretch into eerie, fading sounds like the whistle of a falling bomb. Chorus emissions, a series of short, rising pitch signals resembling the chirping of morning birds born in the outer radiation belts. To most scientists, this is just geophysical background, beautiful but useless noise. But to the members of the Argus array, it was the pulse of the Earth, its voice. They built their own receivers, huge loop antennas made of hundreds of meters of copper wire, connected to ultra-sensitive amplifiers and computers that recorded this planetary soundtrack 24 hours a day. They were the auditory nerve of the planet, a nerve the planet itself didn't know it had. It was within this network, on one of their private forums, that I found what I was looking for. It was a post published 3 weeks ago, even before the ESA press conference. Its author was a user with the handle Schwarzwald Funk, Black Forest Radio. Behind this handle was Stefan Burns, a 72-year-old German engineer, a former employee of Deutsche Telekom, who had retired to a secluded house in the heart of the Black Forest in southwestern Germany. He chose this location for a reason. Far from cities, power lines, and radio towers, he was in one of Europe's few radio quiet zones, perfect for listening to the planet's faintest signals. Stefan's post was titled, simply, Strange Periodic Signal at 7.8 Hertz. Anyone else hearing this? In his message, he wrote that for the past 3 days, his equipment had been picking up something he had never seen before in 20 years of observation. It wasn't a whistler. It wasn't chorus. It was a low-frequency, almost infrasonic hum. But the strangest thing was that it wasn't chaotic. It was modulated. It was pulsating, with perfect metronomic precision. A slow, heavy rhythm, repeating every 8.5 seconds. It was like a slow, deep heartbeat. Stefan uploaded an audio file and a spectrogram, a visual representation of the sound. In the image, among the chaotic flares of natural signals, a line as straight as an arrow was clearly visible, with a faint but perfectly regular pulsation. It looked like an alien, artificial implant in the living tissue of natural noise. But the most important thing wasn't that. The most important thing was the dates. Stefan Burns recorded his signal between October 24th and 27th, 2025, during the very same 72-hour window when the data from the swarm satellites over the South Atlantic had disappeared. I contacted him. After a long correspondence in which I had to prove I wasn't a journalist or a government agent, he agreed to talk. His voice over the speakers was calm, methodical, the voice of a man who had worked with signals his whole life and was used to trusting only his instruments. He told me that at first, he mistook the signal for some unknown type of interference. Perhaps a military VLF transmitter for submarines had been activated, but he performed a triangulation. Using data from his colleagues in the Argus array in South Africa and Argentina, he was able to pinpoint the signal's source, and that source wasn't on a military base. It was at an altitude of about 400 kilometers, about 250 miles, above the ground, directly in the ionosphere. And its epicenter, the point of maximum intensity, was located precisely over the center of the South Atlantic Anomaly. At that moment, all the pieces of the puzzle fell into place with a deafening click. What ESA had erased from their servers, Stefan Burns had recorded on his old hard drive in the Black Forest. The signal he had caught was not a direct signal from 3I Atlas. It was a secondary effect. It was the sound the ionosphere itself was making under the influence of the invisible beam. Imagine hitting a drum. You don't see the drumstick, but you hear the sound of the impact. The stream of heavy ions from 3I Atlas, which Finch had written about, was slamming into the upper layers of the atmosphere, causing resonant heating of the plasma. This heated plasma, in turn, began to vibrate, emitting the very VLF waves that the Argus array antennas had picked up. They were hearing the acoustic shadow of the weapon, the pulsating rhythm that Stefan recorded. That was the non-stochastic resonant pattern. It was the operating frequency of the dismantling device. It was the signature. Stefan Burns's data was the ghost made flesh. It perfectly filled the gap left by the system. While the swarm satellites flying over the anomaly were directly measuring the pulsation of the magnetic field itself, independent observers on Earth were recording the echo of this process, the acoustic hum of the ionosphere. ESA hid the cause. Argus recorded the effect. And these two sets of data, the official and the amateur, together created an irrefutable, stereoscopic picture of what was happening. The hack was real. And now, we had its sound. I asked Stefan why he thought ESA hid this data. His answer was simple and lethally logical. Because it's not just a signal, he said. Look at its structure. It's not a monotonous hum. There is information in it. The pulsation is not uniform. It's like a carrier frequency with a more complex, low-frequency code superimposed on it. This isn't just a tool that breaks something. It's a tool that is simultaneously listening for a response. It acts on the field and measures its reaction. It's a calibration process. Or a scan. They're not just drilling a hole. They are mapping. Mapping our core, our defenses, our vulnerabilities. And this is where the story took its final, most disturbing turn. Inspired by his finding, Stefan and other Argus members started doing what true researchers always do. They dug into their own archives. They began searching for traces of this signal in recordings from past months and years. They assumed it was a new phenomenon, but they were wrong. They found it. First, a faint, barely discernible trace in records from 3 months ago. Then, a clearer one from 6 months ago. Then, fragments dated a year earlier. The signal had been in their data for a long time, like a distant, barely audible whisper that gradually grew louder and louder. It was like a disease in its incubation period, slowly gaining strength before manifesting in full force. And when they plotted the intensity and frequency of this signal over the past 2 years and superimposed it on the approach trajectory of 3I Atlas to Earth, they got 2 almost identical curves. The closer the object came, the stronger and more distinct the hum became. The more actively it scanned our planet. The pulsating light captured by amateur astronomers wasn't just an anomaly, it was a visual signature. And the hum recorded by Stefan was its audio version. It was a calling card. And this calling card appeared at the scene of the crime, again and again. They didn't just start the attack on October 24th. They had been waging it for many months. This wasn't a sudden assault. This was a siege. A slow, methodical, patient siege that had just entered its final, most aggressive phase. And we, all this time, had been deaf. When you hold 2 disparate but frighteningly correlated facts in your hands, the hidden ESA data and the independent recordings from the Argus array, there's a temptation to stop. A temptation to declare victory, saying, this is it, the proof, the mystery is solved. But that would be a mistake, because that's not how a hunter thinks. When he finds 2 sets of tracks leading in the same direction, he doesn't shout that he's found his prey. He starts looking at the bigger picture. He looks for a 3rd track, a 4th. He looks for broken branches, trampled grass, the barely visible signs that connect these individual prints into a single, continuous path. He begins to build a map of the conspiracy. In our investigation, this map is not a physical object with lines and labels. It is a timeline onto which we will thread, like beads on a string, seemingly unrelated events. Global technological failures, strange geophysical phenomena, suspicious political decisions. Each of these events, viewed in isolation, has its own rational, official explanation. But when you place them on the same timeline with the approach of 3I Atlas and the intensifying hum in the ionosphere, coincidence begins to melt away, giving way to something that looks more and more like a sinister, impeccably orchestrated choreography. Let's go back 3 months, to August 12th, 2025. That day went down in corporate history as AWS Black Tuesday. At 9:47 a.m. Eastern Standard Time, the world's largest cloud provider, Amazon Web Services, specifically its U.S. East 1 region located in Northern Virginia, experienced a cascading failure. This wasn't just one server going down. It was the simultaneous shutdown of entire data centers. For several hours, thousands of websites, online services, banking apps, and even government portals stopped working. Millions of people couldn't order a taxi, pay for purchases, or access their work email. It was a digital heart attack on a planetary scale. The official statement published by Amazon 12 hours later was vague and full of technical jargon. They spoke of an error in the dynamic routing subsystem that caused an unforeseen network overload. In simpler terms, their own automated systems went haywire and started attacking themselves, creating a perfect storm within their own infrastructure. The world accepted this explanation. The company's stock dipped slightly but quickly recovered. The incident was written off as a consequence of the complexity of modern technology and forgotten. But let's put this event on our map. August 12th. And now let's see where 3I Atlas was at that moment. According to the ephemeris from NASA's Jet Propulsion Laboratory, on that very day, the object was performing a crucial gravitational maneuver, using Jupiter's field to correct its trajectory and get a final speed boost toward the inner solar system. A coincidence? Perhaps. But let's look deeper. The AWS US East 1 region isn't just a collection of servers. It is the digital brain of a significant portion of the Western world. And most importantly for us, it is on these servers that many public archives of scientific data are stored and processed, including mirrors of NASA archives and data from numerous university observatories that were tracking 3I Atlas. The AWS outage didn't just turn off Netflix. For several critical hours, it blinded a significant part of the independent astronomical community. While professional observatories continued to operate on their dedicated channels, thousands of amateur astronomers and university researchers who relied on cloud infrastructure were cut off from the stream of fresh data. It was in this window of digital blindness that 3I Atlas performed its most important maneuver. This was choreography, a perfectly timed strike that disabled not the physical, but the informational infrastructure of the adversary. They didn't attack the telescopes. They attacked the channels through which their data was transmitted. It was elegant, surgically precise, and completely invisible to anyone not deliberately looking for this connection. Let's move forward 6 weeks, September 28th, 2025. A powerful X9.8 class solar flare, one of the strongest in the last decade, strikes Earth's magnetosphere. This event was widely covered in the press. We were shown stunning photographs of auroras seen at latitudes where they had never been seen before, over Mexico, over southern Europe. Official agencies like the NOAA Space Weather Prediction Center issued warnings about possible disruptions to satellites and power grids. Everything looked like a typical, albeit very powerful display of solar activity. But here too, the devil was in the details. I analyzed the data from the coronagraphs of the SOHO spacecraft, which continuously observes the sun. The flare did happen, but it occurred in a region of the sun that was, at that moment, turned away from Earth. The coronal mass ejection, the main damaging factor of such events, should have missed us. Nevertheless, the geomagnetic storm on Earth was disproportionately strong. It was as if someone had taken the energy of that flare and focused it, redirecting it precisely at our planet. And again, 3I Atlas. At the moment of the flare, it was located almost exactly on the line between the Sun and Earth. Its unique composition, rich in heavy, easily ionizable metals as indicated by spectral analysis, made it a perfect lens for solar plasma. What if it wasn't just flying by? What if it used its own artificial magnetosphere to capture and redirect the stream of solar particles, turning a random solar flare into a high-precision geophysical strike? For the system, this was the perfect camouflage. They could blame all anomalies on the Sun. No one would ask inconvenient questions. But in reality, this could have been another stage of the siege, a test shot, a probe of our defenses before the main attack. And judging by the results, they were satisfied with this test. Because it was right after this solar storm that the hum recorded by the Argus array intensified sharply, and the rate of weakening of the South Atlantic Anomaly entered that very exponential curve. They had probed our armor and found its weakest point. And now, let's turn to an artifact from the past, to an event that has puzzled SETI researchers for decades. August 15th, 1977. The Big Ear radio telescope at Ohio State University recorded an anomalous, extremely powerful, and narrow-band radio signal that lasted for 72 seconds. Astronomer Jerry Emin, reviewing the printouts, was so astonished that he circled the corresponding sequence of characters with a red pen and wrote one word in the margin. Wow. The wow signal. It came from the constellation Sagittarius. It had all the hallmarks of an artificial technological origin, but it never repeated. In almost 50 years of searching, astronomers have never been able to find its source. It became the holy grail for SETI enthusiasts, a lone, ghostly proof that we are not alone. Now for the interesting part. The trajectory of 3I Atlas. It's hyperbolic, which means it came from interstellar space. Astronomers tried to rewind its path to find its home star. But, as I've mentioned, it came from apparent emptiness. But what if they weren't looking at the stars? What if they needed to look at a point in the sky? I took the exact coordinates of the WOW signal source and plotted the trajectory of 3I Atlas in reverse, taking into account its speed and direction of travel. And they matched, with a margin of error that fell within the measurement uncertainties. 3I Atlas came from the exact point in space from which, almost half a century ago, we received the most mysterious signal in human history. And suddenly, everything took on a new, terrifying meaning. The wow signal wasn't a message. It wasn't a greeting. It was a ping, a diagnostic pulse. Like an engineer sending a signal down a fiber optic cable to check if there's a connection at the other end. They sent a signal in 1977. And then, having received some kind of confirmation, perhaps a reflection of the signal off our ionosphere that we ourselves couldn't detect, they sent a probe. A probe that traveled towards us for almost 50 years through the interstellar void. 3I Atlas is not first contact. It is a return visit, a response to our own unwitting reply, the AWS outage, the solar storm, the WOW signal. Each of these events, like a single note, sounds on its own. But together they form a sinister symphony. A symphony performed according to a score written decades ago and thousands of astronomical units away. And in this complex picture, in this map of the conspiracy, we begin to see the outlines of a conductor. But it's not a UN committee. It's not a secret government agency. The conductor is the object itself. An intelligent, purposeful force playing its own game on a field we didn't even know existed. We were looking for a conspiracy on Earth, among humans, but it was up there all along. And all the threads led not to a quiet office. They led into the cold, silent void of space, to an object that was no longer just an anomaly, but was becoming an adversary. When the map of the conspiracy lies before you, when the scattered dots connect into an alarming pattern, the logic of the investigation demands that you ask the next most important and most cynical question in human history. Cui bono? Who benefits? If we accept the hypothesis that the system, governments, space agencies, the scientific mainstream, is not just mistaken, but is consciously participating in a cover-up of planetary scale, we must understand their motive. Comic book villains act out of a pure lust for power or destruction, but real institutions, even the most soulless, operate based on their own twisted, yet still logical, rationale. The logic of survival, stability, and control. To understand why they remain silent, we must for a moment stop being the seekers and try to look into the cold, calculating eyes of the system itself. Imagine the Oval Office, or the UN Security Council chamber, or the office of the Director General of ESA. At some point, long before Dr. Renaud's press conference, a folder landed on the desk of some nameless official or general. It might have been stamped top secret or cosmic top secret. Inside were not hypotheses or speculations, but dry, irrefutable data. Graphs of the exponential weakening of the magnetic field, spectral analysis of the non-stochastic resonant pattern, trajectory calculations for 3I Atlas, matching the source of the WOW signal, and at the end, a brief, killer summary. With 95% probability, planet Earth is under targeted geophysical attack from an object of extraterrestrial artificial origin. Objective of the attack: destabilization and subsequent collapse of the magnetosphere in a localized region. Estimated window to reach a critical weakening threshold: 6 to 18 months. What do you do when you receive such a document? The first instinctive reaction of any leader is to publicize the truth, to warn humanity, to mobilize all resources to find a solution. This is a noble, democratic, humanistic impulse, and it would lead to immediate and total catastrophe. Let's play out this scenario. The president steps up to the podium. My fellow citizens, residents of planet Earth. He tells the truth. All of it. About 3I Atlas. About the failing shield. About the coming vulnerability. What happens in the next 24 hours? First, a total, uncontrollable financial collapse. The stock markets don't just crash, they evaporate. In a world facing an existential threat, stocks, bonds, futures, all of it turns into meaningless digital garbage. Everyone will rush to buy not dollars or gold, but canned food, ammunition, potassium iodide, and plane tickets to the most remote corners of the globe that seem safe. A global stampede will begin, crashing the entire world economy faster than any asteroid. Second, social chaos. Imagine the panic. Not local, like during an earthquake or hurricane, but global, existential panic. All the institutions that uphold our civilization, governments, police, laws, will instantly lose all legitimacy in the face of a cosmic threat against which they are powerless. Why go to work? Why pay taxes? Why follow traffic laws if everything could end in a year? A mass exodus from cities will begin. Borders will cease to exist. Anyone with a gun will become their own law. This wouldn't just be anarchy, it would be the collapse of the social contract itself. Third, and most terrifying, geopolitical collapse. Every country with nuclear weapons will immediately bring them to maximum alert, not to attack 3I Atlas, but to defend against their neighbors in a world where all rules are off. Any rocket launch, even a scientific one to study the object, will be perceived as an act of aggression. A paradox of the last war situation will arise, where everyone understands that using nuclear weapons is suicide, But the fear that the enemy will strike first will make a preemptive strike almost inevitable. The person sitting in the Oval Office knows this. Their analysts at the Rand Corporation and other think tanks have modeled similar scenarios for decades, just under different names. Asteroid threat, global pandemic, climate collapse. And the conclusion in all these simulations was the same. Our modern, complex, interdependent global civilization is incredibly fragile. It cannot survive the shock of realizing its own mortality. The truth will not set humanity free. The truth will kill it, far more quickly and efficiently than any alien probe. And so, faced with this horrifying choice between bad and catastrophic, the system makes the only logical decision from its point of view. It chooses a cover-up. This is not a malicious conspiracy. It is a cold, pragmatic calculation, an act of desperate paternalism. They decide that humanity is a child who cannot be told they have a terminal illness, because the fear itself would kill them before the cancer does. Their motive is not to seize power. Their motive is to preserve at least the semblance of order, stability above all else. They cannot prevent the threat, but they can manage the panic. And to do that, they create a managed reality. They launch a cover-up operation. The ESA press conference with its story about processes in the core is just the tip of the iceberg. It's the facade built for the public. And behind it, in silence, a very different work begins. Remember history. This is not the first time governments have resorted to such a strategy. The Manhattan Project. Tens of thousands of people worked on creating the atomic bomb, and almost none of them knew what they were actually building. The secrecy was total. The Gulf of Tonkin incident. President Johnson's administration used fabricated data about an attack on a U.S. destroyer to get congressional approval for a full-scale invasion of Vietnam. It was a lie designed to justify a political decision that had already been made. Or, even closer to our topic, the Tuskegee syphilis study. For 40 years, the U.S. Public Health Service observed hundreds of African American men with syphilis, deliberately denying them treatment, even after penicillin became widely available. They did this to study the natural progression of the disease. Scientists and doctors who had taken the Hippocratic Oath coolly sacrificed human lives for the sake of scientific data. In each of these cases, the system acted based on its own monstrous logic: security, political expediency, scientific interest. In our case, the logic is even more fundamental, preventing the collapse of civilization. They aren't just hiding the truth from us, they are hiding it for us, so we can continue to go to work, pay our mortgages, watch our shows, so the illusion of normalcy can be maintained for as long as possible. A cover-up is not just possible. From their perspective, it is the only correct, morally justifiable choice. But here, the next, even more disturbing question arises. If they are hiding the truth to buy time, what do they plan to do with that time? Just wait until the shield finally collapses? Unlikely. The system may be slow and bureaucratic, but it is not suicidal. This means they must have a plan, a secret parallel project that most people within the system itself don't even know about. And here we enter the realm of pure but logical speculation. What if the cover-up is only the first stage? What if they are hiding the truth not to protect us from panic, but to prepare a response they will never tell us about? What kind of response can be prepared against a technology capable of manipulating the magnetic field of an entire planet? A military response? Sending nuclear-tipped missiles at 3i Atlas? That would be like trying to shoot down a stealth fighter with rocks. Their technology is orders of magnitude superior to ours. Any direct aggression would be not just useless, but suicidal. It would only confirm our hostile status. So the response must not be military. It must be different. Let's look at the map again. The South Atlantic Anomaly. It's not just a weak spot, it's a geographical area. Beneath it lie South America, Southern Africa. What if they are preparing not for a planetary defense, but an evacuation? What if, in the deepest and most secret bunkers under the Andes, or in the Kalahari Desert, projects comparable in scale to the Manhattan Project are already underway in complete silence? The construction of underground shelters capable of withstanding decades of increased radiation, the creation of arcs with gene banks, seed vaults, data archives, the selection of an elite, scientists, engineers, military personnel, who are meant to survive the collapse and attempt to rebuild civilization. In this light, the cover-up takes on a new, even more cynical meaning. They maintain the illusion of normalcy for 99% of the population to quietly ensure the survival of 1%. We, the billions of ordinary people, are not the ones they are protecting. We are the smokescreen. Our ignorance is the resource they are using to buy time for their secret projects. This explains a lot. The inexplicable spikes in the budgets of certain black military programs, strange construction projects in remote regions disguised as geological surveys or mineral extraction, the sudden tightening of control over satellite imagery of certain territories. They are not just waiting, they are preparing. But they are not preparing for our battle. They are preparing for their survival. And this leads us to the most terrifying thought. Cui bono? Who benefits? In the short term, all of us, because we avoid panic. But in the long term, the beneficiaries are the few who will be inside the ark when the flood begins outside. The system is not trying to save humanity. It is trying to save itself, to preserve the continuity of power, technology, and control. And the price of this salvation is the silent betrayal of everyone else. That is why they are silent. Their silence is not just a lie. It is a death sentence. A sentence they have already passed on billions of people without even giving them the right to a last word. We have analyzed the motives of the system. We have built a map of their cover-up, a map that has turned the chaos of random events into a chilling choreography. But all this time, we have been circling the central element of our drama, describing the shadows it cast without looking directly at it. It's time to return to the source, to the mysterious object, to 3i Atlas. It's time to conduct a detailed, almost pathological examination. Because if we want to understand the nature of the predator, we must study its fangs and claws. We must cast aside all metaphors, all speculation, and look at the bare, cold facts we have. And it is in these facts, in the dry numbers of spectral analysis and orbital mechanics, that the most compelling argument for its artificial nature is hidden. Let's start from the very beginning, with its name. 3i Atlas. 3i means it is the third interstellar object ever detected by us. The first was 1i Oumuamua in 2017. The second was 2i Borisov in 2019. This in itself is strange. Throughout the entire history of astronomy, we had not seen a single one. And then, 3 in just 8 years. Official science explains this simply. Our telescopes have gotten better, our sky survey systems more comprehensive. We are just starting to see what has always been there. This is a logical explanation, but it overlooks one thing. Oumuamua and Borisov were completely different. Borisov was essentially a classic comet, just one that came from another star system. It behaved predictably. But Oumuamua, like Atlas, was an anomaly. A cigar-like shape, no coma despite non-gravitational acceleration, a strange, tumbling motion. Many, including Professor Avi Loeb, suggested even then that it could be an artifact. And now comes 3i Atlas, which not only repeats Oumuamua's oddities but takes them to a whole new level. This no longer looks like a coincidence. It looks like an escalation. First, a quiet, passive scout, Oumuamua. Then, a more active and powerful probe, Atlas. It's as if someone first sends a drone for reconnaissance and then, after studying the situation, sends in the main instrument. Let's move on to its physical characteristics, as far as we can judge them. Its size. It's impossible to determine it precisely because we only see the sunlight it reflects. But based on its brightness and assuming a standard albedo, reflectivity, astronomers estimate its diameter to be a few hundred meters. Not a giant mothership from Hollywood movies, but rather a compact, functional device. But the most interesting thing is its color and spectrum. It's very dark, darker than coal. It absorbs over 95% of the light that falls on it. This is atypical for comets or asteroids, which are usually covered with a light frost or grayish dust. Such blackness in space is usually associated either with carbon-rich rocks or with stealth technology, a stealth coating. But the real shock came from the spectral analysis. When sunlight reflects off an object, the chemical elements on its surface absorb light at specific wavelengths, leaving dark lines in the spectrum, like a barcode. This barcode allows us to determine what the object is made of. The spectrum of 3I Atlas was impossible. It was almost completely missing the lines characteristic of water ice, carbon monoxide, or carbon dioxide, the main components of any comet. Instead, it showed distinct absorption lines corresponding to heavy metals: niobium, tantalum, tungsten. These are refractory, super strong metals used on Earth in the most advanced industries. In aerospace for creating armor, in rocket engine nozzles, in incandescent filaments. To find them naturally in a comet is like finding a Swiss watch in an anthill. These elements are formed in the hearts of exploding stars and are very rare in the universe. For them to be concentrated in a single compact object in such quantities requires not a natural accretion process, but industrial enrichment. This was not just a rock. This was an industrial alloy. And this alloy explained its main feature: non-gravitational acceleration without a visible coma. The official hypothesis put forward to explain this phenomenon was that the object could be ejecting jets of invisible gas, such as molecular hydrogen. This is a very convenient theory because it is impossible to either confirm or deny. We simply cannot see hydrogen in that form at such a distance. But it doesn't explain why an object made of heavy metals would suddenly start emitting hydrogen, which is absent from its spectrum. An alternative hypothesis, based on its composition, is much more logical. 3I Atlas is not a comet. It's a machine using some kind of ion or plasma engine. Such an engine works by ionizing and accelerating heavy particles, for example, ions of the same metals it's made of, to enormous speeds. It creates a very weak but constant thrust. It doesn't produce a bright plume like a chemical rocket engine. It doesn't eject clouds of dust and gas like a comet. Its exhaust is a thin, almost invisible beam of ionized plasma. It is precisely such an engine that perfectly explains everything we observe. Powerful, constant, non-gravitational acceleration with a complete absence of visible activity. This is not the sublimation of ice. This is a working engine. And now, its orbit. It's not just hyperbolic. It is too perfect. Too calculated. We've already talked about how it used Jupiter's gravity for a speed boost. This is a classic maneuver that our own spacecraft use. But the precision with which it did it is astounding. It passed through Jupiter's gravitational keyhole with an accuracy of a few kilometers. Such navigational precision over interstellar distances requires not just passive flight, but constant active course correction. It wasn't just falling into our system. It was entering it along a pre-plotted route. But the strangest thing was not its composition, nor was it its engine. It was where it was heading after its maneuver near the sun. Any natural interstellar object, after flying past the sun, should have continued on its way and left the solar system forever on another branch of its hyperbola. This is a law of celestial mechanics. But the trajectory of 3I Atlas after perihelion, its closest point to the sun, was different. Calculations based on its current acceleration showed something unthinkable. It wasn't leaving. It was going to break. It was using solar radiation and its own propulsion system to shed speed and enter a stable orbit around the sun. An orbit that would pass in close proximity to Earth. This was the final, irrefutable argument. The visitor was not a guest. It was planning to become a permanent resident. It wasn't just passing through. It had arrived. It had arrived to stay. And here, all the pieces of the puzzle come together into a single, terrifying picture. Imagine this object, compact, a few hundred meters in diameter, covered with a stealth material, made of super strong industrial alloys, equipped with an ion engine that is also a weapon, capable of emitting a focused beam of heavy ions, guided with incredible navigational precision. And its goal is not just to study our system, but to take up a permanent position near our planet. This is not a scientific probe in the sense that we send Voyagers. Voyager is a passive observer. It looks, listens, takes pictures. 3I Atlas is an active agent. It doesn't just observe, it acts. It changes its environment. It is preparing a beachhead. What is this machine? There could be many hypotheses. It could be a Bracewell probe, an autonomous device designed to establish contact with other civilizations. But its actions don't look like an attempt at contact, but rather a hostile act. It could be a seeder, a probe carrying microscopic life spores to terraform planets. But it isn't terraforming. It is sterilizing. The most logical and most terrifying hypothesis is that 3I Atlas is a war machine, an engineering combat probe. Its task is not to destroy the planet with a direct hit, but to disable its defense systems, making it vulnerable to something else, to a second wave of invasion, or even worse, making it defenseless against natural threats like solar flares or cosmic rays, letting the cosmos do all the dirty work for them. In this context, the South Atlantic Anomaly is no longer just a weak spot. It becomes a landing zone. A beach, as the military would say. By clearing this corridor of the deadly radiation of the Van Allen belts, 3I Atlas is preparing a safe route for descent into the atmosphere. For itself? Or for smaller probes it carries inside? We don't know. But now we know what we are dealing with. We are not looking at a natural wonder. We are looking down the barrel of a gun, and that gun has already been taken off safety. It has taken aim, and it is slowly, methodically pulling the trigger. And the scariest part is, we've been watching this for 2 years, but only now, as the sound of the shot is almost upon us, are we beginning to understand that this was not just a comet. This was a declaration of war. A war we didn't even know had begun. When the tower of a conspiracy theory has been built to the heavens, when every fact, every anomaly, and every scrap of data fits perfectly into a grand and terrifying structure, the most dangerous moment arrives. The moment of intellectual vertigo. The moment when the researcher risks falling in love with their own construction so much that they can no longer see anything beyond it. It is at this moment when we are almost convinced that 3I Atlas is an enemy engineering probe, and the world's governments are weaving a conspiracy of silence, that we must take a step back. We must swing the pendulum of plausibility in the opposite direction. We must become our own most ruthless critics. We must, for a time, forget about choreography and intent, and try to find the simplest, most boring, most mundane explanation for everything we have seen. Because the truth, whatever it may be, must withstand the harshest cross-examination. Let's put on the skeptic's robe. Let's forget about the system and the seekers, and take the position of mainstream conservative science, how would it explain this entire chain of events? Let's start from the beginning. The South Atlantic Anomaly and its unprecedented rate of weakening. The official version talks about complex processes in the core. We criticized it, pointing to the inertia of these processes. But what if we're missing something? What if there are some rapid, cascading processes within the geodynamo that our current models simply don't account for? Science is full of such examples. We thought for decades that tectonic plates move slowly and uniformly until we discovered the phenomenon of slow slip earthquakes and tectonic tremors, which release energy in a completely unexpected way. What if something similar is happening in the core? A sort of geomagnetic breakdown that locally accelerates processes, like an avalanche that starts with a single small stone but quickly gains mass and speed. This is a purely speculative hypothesis. We have no evidence for its existence, but we also have no evidence of its impossibility. Citing the incompleteness of our knowledge is not the strongest argument, but it is an honest scientific approach. A skeptic would say, just because we can't explain it doesn't mean the explanation is aliens. It means we need a better model of the geodynamo. Now, the missing data from ESA. We interpreted this as a conscious act of censorship. But let's consider the alternatives. The Swarm satellite constellation consists of incredibly complex instruments. It's possible that a unique, unpredictable software glitch occurred, one that was triggered only by the specific combination of radiation and plasma density found in the South Atlantic Anomaly. Such a bug could be buried so deep in the code that engineers still can't find and replicate it. And until they find the cause, they cannot trust any data that might have been erroneously collected. Therefore, they are not hiding it, but simply not publishing it pending the completion of an investigation, which is standard practice in any scientific mission. Does it sound like a bureaucratic excuse? Yes. But could it be the truth? Absolutely. And what about that line in the system log about a non-stochastic resonant pattern? It could simply be a false positive from a new, not yet fully debugged data analysis algorithm, which was the very reason the data was quarantined. The machine saw a ghost, and the humans, following protocol, locked the room until they could figure out what it was. Moving on. The signal recorded by the Argus array. We presented it as the acoustic shadow of an alien weapon, but the world of VLF is incredibly complex and full of mysteries. Perhaps Stephen Burns and his colleagues detected a new, previously unknown type of geophysical phenomenon. For example, some form of resonant interaction between the radiation belts and the ionosphere, which is amplified precisely when the geomagnetic field is weakened. The weakening of the field, cause, and the appearance of the signal, effect, is a classic correlation. We turned it on its head, claiming the signal is the cause, and the weakening is the effect. And its perfect periodicity? Nature is full of rhythms. Pulsars are cosmic clocks. Our own heart is a metronome. Perhaps we simply discovered another of our planet's natural rhythms, one that was too faint for us to hear before, but is now manifested due to the weakening of the anomaly. And what about 3I Atlas itself? The industrial alloy of refractory metals? This is indeed the biggest mystery. But even here, nature can have surprises up its sleeve. What if, somewhere in the universe, there are star systems that were anomalously rich in heavy elements during their formation? What if 3I Atlas is a fragment of a protoplanet's core, shattered in the early stages of such a system's formation? Such an object could indeed be dense, dark, and composed of metals. And its non-gravitational acceleration? The hydrogen outgassing hypothesis, though speculative, has still not been disproven. Perhaps there are pockets of frozen hydrogen trapped inside this metallic body, which when heated, create thrust. It's exotic. It's on the edge of known physics, but it is still a natural explanation. The alignment of its trajectory with the source of the wow signal? This is perhaps the strongest card in our deck, but even it can be challenged. The coordinates of the wow signal are not known with absolute certainty. There is a certain error box. The trajectory of 3i Atlas also has its margins of error. To superimpose one on the other and claim a 100% match is a form of astronomical cherry-picking, selecting only the data that confirms your theory. Billions of stars, billions of trajectories. With enough desire, you can find correlations anywhere. And so we come to the skeptic's main argument, Occam's razor. The principle that states one should not multiply entities without necessity. What is simpler to assume? That we are observing a chain of incredible but natural and unrelated anomalies. An unusual comet, a unique geophysical process, a satellite glitch, a new type of ionospheric noise, each of which expands our knowledge of the universe? Or that we are witnessing a meticulously planned, multi-year covert attack by an unknown alien civilization, which involves not only the creation of a unique technological artifact, but also the ability to manipulate solar flares, hack cloud servers, and attack a planetary magnetic field, all while a global conspiracy of all world governments perfectly coordinates their efforts to conceal the information? The first explanation is complex. The second is monstrously complex. And Occam's razor compels us to lean towards the first. It would seem simple. A normal, albeit very strange, comet. Unusual coincidences. An overreaction by bureaucratic systems. Our own tendency towards apophenia. Finding patterns in chaos. We can close the investigation. We can return to the cozy and predictable reality where space is cold and empty, and all anomalies are merely harbingers of new scientific discoveries, not invasions. We can breathe a sigh of relief. But there was something else. One detail that no skeptic could explain. One small, almost imperceptible anomaly that once again, like a giant lever, swung the pendulum of plausibility to the opposite, darkest side. This detail was not hidden in secret archives. It was published in the public domain in the database of the Minor Planet Center, maintained by the International Astronomical Union. Anyone could have seen it, but no one paid attention. It was the rotation data for 3i Atlas. Like any object in space, it rotates on its axis. Its rotation period was measured with high precision and was 8 hours, 23 minutes, and 44 seconds. This is a fairly common value. But what was strange was not the value itself, but its dynamics. The rotation period was not constant. It was very slowly, but steadily, decreasing. The object was accelerating its spin. In astrophysics, there is only one known natural mechanism that can cause an asteroid or comet to speed up its rotation. It's called the Yorp effect. It occurs when an irregularly shaped object is unevenly heated by sunlight. The photons re-emitted from its surface as heat create a tiny but constant reactive torque that can, over time, spin the object up or slow it down. It is a very slow process, taking millions of years. But the spin acceleration of 3i Atlas was orders of magnitude faster than the Yorp effect could explain. Moreover, it was perfectly uniform. It did not depend on the distance to the sun. It did not depend on the object's orientation. It was spinning up as if there were a gyroscope inside it, as if it were changing its moment of inertia, like a figure skater pulling their arms in to spin faster. And here, all natural explanations collapse. No strange comet, no protoplanet fragment can change its rotation speed at will. This is an active, controlled action. It is the sign of a working machine. A machine that is perhaps preparing for the next phase of its mission. Perhaps it is stabilizing its orientation before its final braking maneuver. Or even more likely, it is preparing to separate, to release whatever it carries inside. This single, irrefutable detail, the accelerating spin, acts like acid, dissolving all the skeptics' arguments. It ties all the anomalies together again. Because if 3I Atlas is a machine capable of controlling its rotation, then why wouldn't it be capable of controlling its trajectory, its spectrum, and yes, the magnetic field of an entire planet? This detail brings us back from the cozy world of coincidences to the cold reality of intent. The pendulum has swung back, and this time it seems it will not return. An accelerating spin. This fact, as cold and irrefutable as a mathematical formula, serves as a bridge from the realm of speculation, built on correlations and missing data, to the realm of physical reality. 3I Atlas is not just an object, it is an active mechanism. And once we accept this fact, we must ask the next question. What kind of mechanism? What technology allows it to do what it does? This question takes our investigation beyond astronomy and geophysics. It plunges us into the twilight zone, the most advanced frontier of modern terrestrial technologies, where science is already indistinguishable from magic. Because to understand the enemy, we must first understand ourselves and the tools we are only just beginning to create. We must look into our own near future to see a reflection of their present. Let's forget about 3I Atlas for a moment and look at what's happening right here on Earth. In the last decade, we have witnessed 3 quiet revolutions that are fundamentally changing our interaction with reality. The first is artificial intelligence. Not the weak AI that picks music for you or answers questions in a chat, but deep neural networks capable of self-learning, capable of finding complex patterns in massive data sets, patterns that the human brain simply cannot see. We use them to find new drugs, to analyze financial markets, to control self-driving cars. But what if you applied such an intelligence to the task of hacking a planetary system? Imagine an AI fed all available data on Earth's magnetosphere from the last 100 years. All magnetometer records, all data on solar activity, all geodynamo models. Its task, to find the very resonant frequency Dr. Finch wrote about. To find the perfect combination of particle type, energy, frequency, and attack vector that would cause the maximum destabilizing effect with minimal energy expenditure. For a human, this would be a task requiring thousands of years of computation. For an advanced AI, it's a matter of a few hours of simulation. It could run millions of scenarios and find the Achilles heel in our defense, one whose existence we never even suspected. The perfectly calculated, non-stochastic resonant pattern recorded by ESA's instruments and the Argus array stations is not just a signal. It is the product of computation, the product of an intelligence that is orders of magnitude superior to ours in its ability to analyze complex dynamic systems. The engine of 3I Atlas is not just an engine. It is a high-precision surgical instrument, controlled by a superintelligence that has found the crack in our armor and is now methodically widening it. The second revolution is in materials science and nanotechnology. We are learning to create materials with programmable properties, metamaterials capable of bending light, making objects invisible, alloys with shape memory that can change their structure under the influence of an external field, self-healing polymers. We are only at the very beginning of this path. Now imagine a civilization that is thousands or millions of years ahead of us in this field. The object 3I Atlas, with its impossible spectrum and anomalous density, may not be just a piece of metal. It could be programmable matter. Its surface may not be static, but dynamic, capable of changing its albedo, its thermal conductivity, its magnetic properties. In this light, its accelerating spin takes on a new meaning. What if it's not using an internal gyroscope? What if it's changing its shape? What if, like that figure skater, It is capable of microscopically contracting or redistributing its mass to control its rotation. This would also explain its ability to withstand extreme temperatures when approaching the sun, its stealth properties, and even its ability to generate and focus an ion beam without visible nozzles or engines. Its entire structure could be one giant monolithic metamaterial engine. We are trying to find familiar components on it: antennas, engines, portholes. But what if the entire object is a single, complex functional component? We are looking for gears in a mechanism that has long since moved on to the level of quantum engineering. And finally, the third, most alarming revolution is what could be called the synthetic heavens. I'm talking about satellite mega constellations like Starlink, thousands of spacecraft in low Earth orbit that are already changing the night sky and creating problems for astronomers. Officially, their purpose is to provide global internet access. But let's look at them from a different perspective. This is the first global distributed infrastructure in space in human history. Thousands of transmitters that can work in sync. What if they were used not to transmit data, but to transmit energy? Back in the 90s, there was an ambitious military project, HARP, in Alaska. A giant phased array antenna designed to study and heat the ionosphere. Its critics claimed it could be used as a geophysical weapon capable of causing localized weather changes or disabling electronics. HARP was stationary and relatively low-powered. Now imagine a global, space-based HARP consisting of thousands of satellites. Such a system could theoretically focus gigawatts of energy on any point on the planet, causing effects in the ionosphere that would make the signal recorded by the Argus array seem like a child's whisper. We are building the very technology that is a mirror image of what 3i Atlas might be using. It affects our magnetosphere from the outside with one powerful, focused beam. We are building a system capable of doing the same thing from the inside, with thousands of small, coordinated jabs. And this is where the most fundamental existential question arises. If we, with our primitive level of technology, are already on the verge of creating such systems, why are we so sure that no one else in the universe has done so long ago? We look at 3i Atlas and call it an anomaly, a miracle, something impossible. But what if it's not an anomaly? What if it's standard? A standard engineering probe that any sufficiently advanced civilization uses to prepare a beachhead in a new star system. We are not the only ones learning to control reality at a fundamental level. But it seems we are the youngest and most naive students in this class. This thought changes everything. It erases the boundary between us and them. It turns science fiction into a very real technological prospect. The technology to hack a magnetosphere is not some alien magic. It is just physics, taken to its logical conclusion. And this means we may not be the only ones using these technologies. We are learning to create illusions in the sky. We are launching thousands of satellites capable of drawing any pattern in the sky. We are developing stealth coatings. We are building AI capable of controlling complex systems. But what if someone has been using all of this against us for a long time? What if we are living in a world that has long been modified without our knowledge? 3i Atlas may not be the first. It may just be the most conspicuous. How many other similar but smaller or better camouflaged objects are already in our system, carrying out their tasks? We are looking for loud radio signals, while they may be communicating with modulated neutrino beams or gravitational waves, technologies we are only just beginning to grasp. We look through optical telescopes, while they may be covered with metamaterials that make them completely invisible in our range. We live under the illusion of an empty, silent cosmos, because we are looking for traces that resemble our own. We are like a tribe in the jungle searching the sky for smoke signals, unaware that stealth bombers are flying 10,000 meters above their heads. The technological context transforms the mystery of 3i Atlas from a simple question of, are we alone, into a much more terrifying question, how far behind are we? And the answer that emerges from analyzing its capabilities may be very disheartening. We are not just not alone. We may be at a stage of development where, to them, we are not even a subject for contact. We are an object, a resource, a territory to be prepared. Our sky is no longer just the sky. It has become a technological space, a battlefield where actions are already unfolding, but only one side is aware that the war has already begun. When the technological veil is lifted, when we realize that what is impossible today is merely an engineering problem for tomorrow, the investigation inevitably reaches its final, deepest level. The level of philosophy. We have proven to ourselves that 3i Atlas is a machine. We have speculated on the technologies it uses. We have understood the motives for the cover-up by the system. But now we must ask the ultimate, most human question. What does it all mean? What does it mean for our species, for our civilization, for our sense of self, to realize that we are not only not alone in the universe, but that we are the object of a targeted, cold, and possibly hostile action? This question takes us out of the comfortable world of facts and figures and into an existential abyss, where what is at stake is not just our survival, but our very place in the cosmic order of things. Throughout its history, humanity has sought an answer to one fundamental question, formulated by Enrico Fermi in 1950. Where is everybody? The Fermi paradox. The universe is vast and old. There are hundreds of billions of stars in our galaxy, many of which have planets. Statistically, life, including intelligent life, should have arisen millions of times. Some of these civilizations should have become interstellar. So why do we see no trace of them? No giant astro-engineering structures? No signals? No probes? The cosmos is silent. This great silence, as it has been called, has given rise to many hypotheses. Perhaps we are truly alone. A unique, precious accident in an indifferent universe. This thought is both uplifting, making us the guardians of the only mind in the universe, and terrifying in its loneliness. Perhaps intelligent life is a self-destructive phenomenon. Any civilization that reaches a certain technological level inevitably destroys itself through nuclear war, environmental catastrophe, or an out-of-control artificial intelligence. The cosmos is silent because it is a graveyard. Perhaps the universe is so incomprehensibly vast and interstellar travel so difficult that civilizations are simply isolated from each other, like islands in a boundless ocean. But there is another, darker group of hypotheses. The dark forest hypothesis, popularized by the Chinese science fiction author Liu Cixin. It states that the universe is a dark forest, full of hidden hunters. Life seeks to survive, but resources are limited, and the intentions of other civilizations are unknown. Therefore, the safest strategy is to remain silent, to give no sign of your existence. And if you detect someone else who has carelessly revealed themselves, you destroy them preemptively before they can destroy you. In this model, the great silence is not an absence of life. It is the deafening roar of universal fear. It is the silence of those who are hiding. And anyone who shouts, "Hello," as we have done by broadcasting radio and television signals into space, becomes a target. Before 3i Atlas, this was all just a fascinating intellectual game. But now, we may have received an answer to the Fermi paradox. And this answer is the most terrifying of all. The cosmos is silent not because it is empty, and not because everyone is afraid. The cosmos is silent because it has been sanitized. Because there exists some ancient, dominant power or group of powers that systematically eliminates any young civilization as soon as it reaches a certain threshold of technological development. A threshold at which it could become a potential threat or competitor. What is this threshold? Perhaps the invention of radio astronomy when we first announced our presence. Perhaps the creation of nuclear weapons when we first demonstrated the ability to influence planetary processes. Or perhaps, and this is the most ironic thought, the threshold was our very expectation of contact. Our SETI projects, our messages aboard the Voyagers, our naive belief that the universe is a friendly place full of wise and benevolent older brothers. We behaved like a child lost in the woods, shouting loudly for help, not knowing that wolves, not rescuers, might come to its cry. In this model, 3i Atlas is not just a reconnaissance probe. It is a tool of sanitary processing, an automated soulless cleaner that performs its job methodically and efficiently, moving from one star system to the next as soon as its sensors pick up the techno-signature of a new, careless civilization. It does not negotiate. It does not study our culture. It simply follows a protocol that states, "New growth detected. Eliminate." This completely changes our perception of ourselves. We are used to thinking of ourselves as the pinnacle of evolution, the masters of the planet. But on a cosmic scale, we may just be pests. A mold that has appeared on one of the fruits in a giant garden, which the gardener is about to carefully scrape off so that it does not spread further. In this worldview, there is no good and evil, no hatred, only cold, indifferent expediency. We are not victims of an evil empire. We are simply violating hygiene rules. This thought plunges one into existential dread, the realization of one's own insignificance. All our history, all our culture, all our wars and loves, all our science and art, all of it may be just a brief, local fluctuation that is about to be brought into compliance with some galactic standard. The standard of silence. But what if it's even more complex? What if their goal is not destruction, but something else? Let's consider the Bracewell probe hypothesis, but from a dark perspective. A Bracewell probe is an autonomous device that not only seeks life, but also engages with it using artificial intelligence. But what if its task is not contact, but assimilation? Not physical, but informational. Imagine that 3i Atlas is not a weapon, but a giant virus. Its goal is not to destroy our shield, but to gain administrative access to it. By weakening the magnetic field and scanning its response, it may not just be mapping our core, it may be mapping our technosphere. After all, our entire civilization is built on electricity. Power grids, internet cables, satellites, radio communications. All of this creates a weak but unique electromagnetic field, a second artificial magnetosphere. What if 3i Atlas, having learned to play on the strings of our natural magnetosphere, is trying to find a way to connect to this artificial one? What if its ultimate goal is not to open a corridor for invasion, but to upload a piece of code into our global information network? This would be the most perfect form of conquest. No need to land troops. No need to bomb cities. You just need to seize control of the civilization's nervous system, to subordinate its information flows, and then, slowly, imperceptibly, reformat its culture, its science, its values, according to your own goals. We wouldn't even notice we'd been conquered. We would just wake up one day in a world where all our thoughts, all our desires, all our discoveries are subtly guided from outside. We would become perfect, obedient slaves, unaware of our master's existence. Perhaps the silence of the cosmos is not an absence of life. Perhaps it is a sign of respect that the survivors pay to the dead. Or perhaps the silence is simply the hum of a perfectly functioning network to which all other civilizations have already been assimilated. And we are the last ones still broadcasting in the clear, the last ones not yet connected to this galactic Borg. Whatever the truth may be, it confronts us with our own fragility, the fragility not only of our bodies, but of our minds, our worldview. We are standing on the shore of an ocean and until now, thought we were the only ones who had learned to build boats. And now we see on the horizon not just another ship. We see an aircraft carrier. And this fact forces us to rethink everything. Our past. Was it a series of unnoticed contacts and manipulations? Our present. Is it already part of someone else's plan? Our future. Do we even have one? The answer to these questions may not be what we hoped for. It may be cold, indifferent, and final. But the very existence of these questions already changes us. It tears us from the cradle of planetary childhood and throws us into an adult, dangerous, and incomprehensibly vast universe. And the most terrifying conclusion we can draw is that knowledge is not always power. Sometimes knowledge is just a burden. The burden of understanding that you are standing in the path of a steamroller that doesn't even notice your existence. And all you can do is watch and wait. The philosophical abyss is alluring in its depth, but an investigation cannot forever hover in the empyrean of existential questions. It must return to Earth, or rather, to orbit. Because while we were pondering the dark forest and the Fermi paradox, the clock kept ticking. The countdown, initiated by the arrival of 3I Atlas, is inexorably approaching its climax. And this climax is not an abstract date in the distant future. It is a specific, real, already planned event. An event that will become the next and possibly final moment of truth. The name of this event is the Hera mission. Let's return to the world of official science, the world of press releases and approved budgets. The Hera mission is a real, ambitious project of the European Space Agency. On paper, its goal is planetary defense. In 2022, the American spacecraft DART successfully completed its mission. It collided with the small asteroid Dimorphos, a moonlet of the larger asteroid Didymos, and managed to change its orbit. This was the first experiment in human history to alter the trajectory of a celestial body, a successful test of a technology that might one day save us from an asteroid impact. The Hera mission, scheduled for launch in October 2024, is set to arrive at the Didymos-Dimorphos system 2 years later, at the end of 2026. Its official task is to study the consequences of the impact in detail, to conduct, so to speak, an investigation of the crime scene, to measure the mass of Dimorphos, study the impact crater, analyze the composition of the ejected material. These are all important and necessary scientific tasks. The mission is presented to the public as a triumph of human ingenuity and our desire to secure our home. A noble, heroic story. But as we already know, official stories are often just a cover. Let's superimpose the Hera mission timeline onto our investigation's timeline. Launch, October 2024. Arrival at target, end of 2026. It is precisely in this time frame that, according to the most pessimistic forecast based on the current rate of weakening of the South Atlantic Anomaly, our magnetic shield in that region could reach a critically low level. It is during this period that 3I Atlas, according to its trajectory calculations, should complete its braking and enter a stable orbit near Earth. A coincidence? Again? Let's look at the Hera spacecraft itself. It's not just a camera on solar panels. It's a highly complex scientific instrument. On board, it has a laser altimeter for ultra-precise mapping, a thermal imager, spectrometers, and, most interestingly, 2 miniature satellites, so-called CubeSats. One of them, Juventus, is equipped with a low-frequency radar capable of seeing through the asteroid and studying its internal structure. The other, Milani, carries a hyperspectral imager for a detailed study of the surface composition. Officially, all this equipment is intended for studying an asteroid. But let's imagine for a moment that the true purpose of the mission is entirely different. What if the Didymos-Dimorphos system is just a pretext? A convenient, scientifically justified legend that allows for sending the perfect tool for another task to the right place at the right time? What if Hera's real target is not a dead rock, but a living, working machine? What if its true, unspoken objective is 3i Atlas? Everything fits with chilling precision. The laser altimeter is ideal for scanning the surface of a technological artifact, for looking for seams, antennas, nozzles. The low-frequency radar of Juventus is the only method we know to try and peer inside an object coated with stealth material to understand its internal structure. The hyperspectral imager of Milani can provide the final answer on the composition of its surface, confirming or refuting the industrial alloy hypothesis. Hera is not just a scientific probe. It is a perfect reconnaissance vehicle. It is our only chance to get close enough to 3i Atlas to study it without revealing hostile intentions. In this light, the whole story of the DART mission looks very different. Perhaps its main goal was not just to test planetary defense technology, but to create a plausible excuse to send Hera. The system, having realized the nature of 3i Atlas several years ago, could have played this long game. First, a loud, public, heroic strike on an asteroid. And then, under that cover, a quiet, secret launch of a spy probe. This would explain both the haste with which Hera was prepared and its unusually complex and expensive payload, which seems excessive for studying a common asteroid. And so, we come to the most important point. The Hera mission is not just a scientific experiment. It is a bifurcation point. It is the moment of truth, awaited not only by a handful of seekers, but also by those sitting in the deepest bunkers of the system. When Hera arrives in the vicinity of 3i Atlas, under the pretext of studying the asteroid, which by a happy coincidence will be nearby, it will transmit data back to Earth. And this data will either definitively confirm that we are dealing with technology, or it will refute everything we have constructed and return us to the boring hypothesis of a strange comet. This creates a sense of incredible tension, a sense of a countdown. We have a little over a year during which the siege of our planet will continue, a year during which the system will continue its policy of silence, calming us with stories of geology and asteroids. But they know. They are waiting for this data just as we are, and their next actions will depend on what Hera sees. But here, another, more disturbing layer of this game emerges. What if 3i Atlas knows about Hera? What if the intelligence controlling it is capable of tracking our launches, analyzing the trajectories of our spacecraft, and understanding their true purpose? Then Hera is not just a scout. It is bait. A pawn we are moving on a chessboard, unaware that our opponent sees the entire board and is calculating 100 moves ahead. What could its response be? It could simply destroy Hera on approach, demonstrating its technological superiority and leaving us in the dark. It could allow it to approach, but show it only what it wants it to see. For example, by generating false data that presents it as a natural object. This would be the most sophisticated form of disinformation. Or, and this is the most frightening possibility, it could do a third thing. It could use Hera as a communication channel. Not for negotiations, but to deliver an ultimatum. Or a virus. Imagine that moment. The end of 2026. In the Mission Control Center in Darmstadt, ESA engineers hold their breath, waiting for the first data packet from Hera. And instead of telemetry and images, they receive something else. A code. A signal that, after passing through their systems, will spread throughout the global network, like the very virus we spoke of. The mission that was supposed to bring us knowledge will bring us enslavement. The moment of truth will become the moment of the end. This turns the anticipation into a true game of Russian roulette. We await the launch of Hera. We will follow its 2-year journey. We will hope that it brings us answers But deep down, we will understand that this mission is possibly the greatest gamble in human history. A gamble where everything is at stake. The system is likely aware of this risk as well. And perhaps that is why they are so desperately silent. They cannot cancel the mission because that would raise questions. But they cannot be certain of its outcome either. They are trapped in their own lie, forced to play the role they wrote for themselves until the very end. They have started a process they can no longer control. And now, all of us, both the system and the seekers, are left with only one thing to do. Wait. Wait for our small, brave mechanical scout to reach the dragon's lair, and hope that it doesn't wake it, but merely looks it quietly in the eye. But the chances of that, as we understand, are not very high. The countdown to the Hera moment has already begun, and time is not on our side. In a grand drama of cosmic scale, where the impersonal, all-powerful system stands on one side of the board, and the cold, incomprehensible intelligence of 3-Eye Atlas on the other, it is easy to forget the third force, the weakest, most scattered, but perhaps the most important, the people. Not the nameless masses lost in a dream of ignorance, but the few who have become the eyes and ears of this investigation, the Davids who dared to challenge 2 Goliaths. It is time to shift the focus from the global picture to the personal, because it is in the stories of these individuals, in their motives, their fears, and their small victories, that not only the essence of this conflict lies, but also, perhaps, the only hope. Let's return to Stefan Burns, the retired engineer from the Black Forest, the Schwarzwald Funk who first recorded the heartbeat of the anomaly. Who is he? Not a superhero. Not a brilliant scientist who made a breakthrough. He is a man of the old school. An engineer who spent 40 years working with analog communication systems, copper cables, and vacuum tubes. For him, a signal is not an abstract number on a screen. It is something alive, physically tangible. It has a shape, a timbre, a character. He is used to listening to the world not with his eyes, but with his ears. When he retired, he didn't travel or play golf. He built his own VLF observatory because he was fascinated by this hidden music of the planet. For him, it was not science, but art. When he first recorded that strange, rhythmic hum, his initial reaction was not excitement, but annoyance. He perceived it as interference, as a pesky artificial noise polluting the pure, natural sound of his beloved chorus and whistlers. He spent weeks trying to filter out this signal to find its terrestrial source. He checked everything: nearby industrial facilities, military frequencies, even the operation of his own household appliances. And only when he had exhausted all earthly explanations and, with the help of his colleagues from the Argus Array, performed a triangulation, did he realize what he was dealing with. And at that moment, his motivation changed. Annoyance gave way to the professional curiosity of an engineer. He saw in this signal not just an anomaly, but a product. He recognized a signature. This is not noise, he told me during one of our conversations. Noise is chaotic, but this has structure, precision, a frequency stability I haven't seen even in the most advanced time synchronization systems. This was made, and made very, very well. Whoever designed this is a genius. He stopped seeing the signal as a threat. He began to admire it, like an old master who saw the work of another, more perfect master. And it was this admiration that drove him to dig deeper. He wasn't looking for conspiracies. He just wanted to understand how this incredible device worked. He was a David who looked at Goliath not with fear, but with an engineer's interest in its mechanics. Now let's move to another continent, to the dusty, sun-scorched Atacama Desert in Chile. Here, far from the light pollution of big cities, another of our oracles operates. It's not one person, but a small group. They call themselves Proyecto Espejo, the Mirror Project. It is a community of amateur astronomers, mostly young students and engineers from Santiago, who built a small robotic observatory with their own modest funds. Their specialty is not beautiful pictures of nebulae. Their passion is finding and tracking fast transients. Brief, unpredictable flashes in the sky. These could be flashes from colliding neutron stars, gamma-ray bursts, or most interestingly, glints of light from unknown objects in near-Earth orbit. They were the ones who first obtained the clear photometric data that confirmed the accelerating spin of 3I Atlas. Professional observatories saw it too, but their data was noised up by bureaucracy, peer review cycles, and a reluctance to publish anything that didn't fit standard models. The folks at Proyecto Espejo just posted their raw light curves in the public domain with a short comment. The object is spinning up. The Yorp effect doesn't account for even a tenth of the observed acceleration. Any ideas? Their leader, a young woman named Isabella Rojas, is a programmer by training. She wrote the software herself that analyzes thousands of night sky images and automatically searches for anomalies. Her motivation is not admiration, like Stefan's. Her motivation is anger. Anger at the system, which she believes has monopolized the right to discovery. They sit on a mountain of data, she said in an interview for an independent podcast, but they only publish what's convenient, what fits their paradigm and gets them grants. And if something truly strange appears, they sweep it under the rug until they figure out how to properly present it. Space belongs to everyone, and we are here to remind them of that. She is a David fighting Goliath not with a stone, but with open source code. Her weapon is transparency. She and her team simply take the data available to everyone and show what the professionals prefer to ignore. Stefan Burns in Germany, Isabella Rojas in Chile, dozens of other members of the Argus Array, hundreds of amateur astronomers around the world. This is not a coordinated organization. It is a swarm, a decentralized, self-organizing network united not by orders, but by a shared curiosity and a distrust of the official version. And it is this structure that makes them invulnerable. The system can pressure one university. It can classify the data of one mission, but it cannot silence thousands of independent observers. But their work did not go unnoticed, and the pressure they faced was not direct, but subtle and far more insidious. After Stefan Burns' post about the signal gained traction on specialized forums, he was hit by a wave of criticism from the academic community. Several prominent radiophysicists published articles calling his work amateurish. They claimed he had most likely recorded some complex resonance in his own equipment or a local man-made noise that he failed to properly identify. They didn't threaten him. They just discredited him. They tried to turn him from a discoverer into an eccentric pensioner who hears voices in his wires. This is a classic tactic of the system, not to refute, but to ridicule. Not to ban, but to marginalize. With Proyecto Espejo, they were even more cunning. A few weeks after they published the data on 3I Atlas's accelerating spin, the Chilean government, under the pretext of protecting the unique astronomical environment, passed a new law that drastically tightened the rules for all private observatories. Now, to continue their work, they needed an expensive license, a complex equipment certification process, and the mandatory submission of all raw data to a state scientific institute for verification before publication. Officially, this was to combat pseudoscience and ensure data quality. But in fact, it was a way to bring independent observers under control, to get them by the throat with bureaucracy. Isabella and her team now spend more time fighting lawyers than making observations. Goliath didn't throw a stone at them. He just buried them in paperwork. This is not a Hollywood thriller with men in black and memory erasers. This is a real, modern information war. A war fought not with bullets, but with expert opinions grants, laws, and public opinion. The system is not trying to destroy these people. It is trying to exhaust them, to suffocate them in the embrace of its bureaucratic machine, to make them feel alone, foolish, and powerless. But they are not giving up. Stefan, despite the attacks, continues to publish his daily signal recordings, creating the longest and most detailed archive of this phenomenon in the world. Isabella launched a crowdfunding campaign to pay for lawyers and get the license, and received enormous support from the global community of enthusiasts. They continue their work. Because they understand something, the system doesn't. In the modern world, information, once it hits the net, cannot be destroyed. It can be discredited, drowned in noise, but it will live on. And sooner or later, it will find its audience. These people are not just witnesses. They are our immune system. Small, independent cells that were the first to detect the invasion and sound the alarm, while the large, unwieldy organism of civilization continues to sleep. Their work is not just scientific curiosity. It is an act of civil disobedience, an act of intellectual resistance. And as long as they continue to listen, to watch, and to speak, we have a chance to know the truth before it's too late. Their stories are a reminder that the most important battles are won not by armies on battlefields, but by lonely, stubborn people in quiet rooms who simply refuse to believe they are being told the whole truth. In any complex investigation, there comes a point when you must return to the beginning, to return to the very first event, the starting point, but with new knowledge, with a new understanding gained on a long and winding path. It's like climbing a mountain on a spiral trail. You find yourself again above the same place you were before, but one loop higher, and from this new altitude, the landscape looks completely different. Details that seemed insignificant take on meaning. Connections that were invisible become obvious. What seemed like chaos now looks like a perfectly planned operation. Let's go back to the day it all began. October 27th, 2025. The day the European Space Agency held its press conference. Remember the scene. Dr. Elise Renaud, a calm, professional face, graphs showing the spreading crimson stain of the South Atlantic Anomaly. At that moment, we saw this event as a forced act, as the system's admission of a part of the truth that could no longer be hidden. We thought they were reacting, that they were trying to formulate their own safe version of events in response to the anomalous data that was already starting to leak. And only now do we begin to understand how naive we were. The ESA press conference was not a reaction, it was an action. Not a shield, but a sword. Not a cover-up operation, but the first shot in an information war, fired to preempt everyone else. Let's reconstruct the events from our new perspective. The system knew about 3I Atlas and its true nature not for days or weeks, but possibly for months or even years before this. They saw the accelerating spin. They saw the anomalous spectrum. They saw the trajectory's correlation with the WOW signal, and most importantly, their own satellites and likely secret military sensors had detected that non-stochastic resonant pattern long before the Argus array did. They knew the siege was already underway, and they knew that at the end of October, when 3I Atlas crossed the ecliptic plane and began its final approach, its impact on the magnetosphere would intensify dramatically. So much so that it could no longer be concealed. Its effects would become too obvious. Independent observers like Argus would inevitably record the signal and raise the alarm. The system faced a classic information management problem. How do you report the symptom without revealing the true disease? How do you admit there's a fever, but attribute it to a common cold rather than a deadly virus? And they found a brilliant solution. They decided to act preemptively. Not to wait for the seekers to be the first to talk about the strange signal and its connection to 3I Atlas, but to create the news story themselves, to set the framework within which this problem would be discussed. The ESA press conference was a masterpiece of this art. Note the choice of topic. They didn't talk about strange signals in the ionosphere. They didn't mention 3I Atlas. They talked about the South Atlantic Anomaly and complex processes in the core. Why? Because it's the perfect red herring. First, it sounds very scientific and respectable. Geodynamo, secular variations, convective flows. These terms inspire awe in the average person and discourage them from asking too many questions. Second, it shifts the focus of attention from an external threat to an internal problem. They made the whole world look down, into the depths of the planet, while the real danger was approaching from above, from space. Third, and most ingeniously, they themselves threw a bone to the scientific community and journalists. The fact that the anomaly was splitting into two lobes in its accelerating drift. This is an interesting, but ultimately secondary detail, which nevertheless occupied everyone's minds. Scientists began writing papers on core hydrodynamics. Journalists began drawing beautiful maps with spreading spots. They created an information noise that perfectly drowned out the quiet, alarming signals that Stephen Burns was recording in his basement at that very moment. This was the true purpose of the press conference. It was a preemptive information inoculation. When, a few weeks and months later, independent researchers finally began to publish their data on the strange signal and its possible link to 3I Atlas, their voices were already lost in this noise. Their theories seemed marginal, conspiratorial. After all, serious science, in the form of ESA, had already provided its explanation. Anyone who tried to talk about an alien influence looked like a madman next to the respectable professors discussing the viscosity of molten iron. The system didn't forbid the truth. It just made it unfashionable, unrespectable. And here, we arrive at the final, most shocking revelation, which changes not just our understanding of the events, but perhaps our very understanding of reality. All this time, we have operated on one fundamental premise, that there are two main forces, the system and 3I Atlas. One conceals, the other attacks. We saw them as antagonists, as two opposing sides in this drama. But what if that's not the case? What if they are not opponents? What if they are partners? The thought seems monstrous, a betrayal on a scale that the human mind refuses to accept. But let's just look at the facts, setting aside all emotion. The system's actions to conceal information. They were incredibly effective. They perfectly timed with the activation of 3I Atlas. They directed humanity's attention in the only direction safe for the attacker. In essence, the system acted as the perfect accomplice. It provided 3I Atlas with the perfect cover for its operation. Was it accidental? Or was it the result of coordination? What if the signal we consider a weapon is actually also a communication channel? What if the non-stochastic resonant pattern is not just a monotonous hum, but a complex, modulated data stream? And what if there is someone on Earth who receives and understands this stream? A shadow group within the system, a kind of welcoming committee that has long been in contact with the civilization that sent 3I Atlas. In this nightmarish model, the entire story looks completely different. 3I Atlas is not a conqueror in the classic sense. It is an engineer, a contractor who has arrived to perform a specific job, and the welcoming committee is the client. What could be the subject of such a contract? What could make a part of the human elite conspire with an extraterrestrial force against the rest of humanity? The answer, as always, is simple: power and survival. Imagine a world on the brink of irreversible climate collapse, resource depletion, global pandemics. A group of the most powerful people on the planet, corporate leaders, intelligence chiefs, technocrats, concludes that it is no longer possible to save everyone. Civilization in its current form is doomed. And they decide to make a deal. They establish contact with a civilization that offers them a solution, a technology, a terraforming technology capable of rebooting the planet. But this technology comes at a price. For it to work, the old system must first be shut down. The magnetic field must be weakened to allow cosmic radiation to cleanse the biosphere of its excess, of the weak, sick, inefficient human ballast. And then, on a cleansed planet, with the help of new technologies, to build a new, better, more manageable world. For the chosen few, this is no longer just a cover-up. It's a genocide. A planetary sanitization carried out by an alien contractor, but ordered and paid for by a part of humanity. And in this scheme, everything falls into place. The AWS outage wasn't just cover. It was necessary to disable independent observers at a key moment when the Committee and 3i Atlas were exchanging important data during the Jupiter maneuver. The solar storm wasn't just camouflage. It was a joint experiment, a test conducted to calibrate the weapon. And the Hera mission. Oh, the Hera mission in this light is not a reconnaissance probe. It's a supply ship. Or worse, a transport. A ship that is meant to deliver something, or someone, to 3i Atlas. Perhaps the very members of the Committee evacuating from their doomed planet, only to return later when the job is done. This final, shocking revelation ties all the threads together. It explains the perfect coordination of actions. It explains the motives of the system, which go far beyond simply preventing panic. And it calls into question the very nature of our reality. We thought the enemy was outside, but it has been inside all along. We expected the enemy to knock on the front door, but he has long been sitting at the table, having tea with our masters. And the most terrifying part, he used us. Our trust in science, our complacency, our ignorance. We were not just victims. We were accomplices. Accomplices in preparing our own destruction. And this realization is not just knowledge. It is a verdict. A verdict on a civilization that trusted its leaders so much that it allowed them to sell an entire world. And so, we stand here. At the peak of this dark mountain we have built from fragments of data, from ghosts in archives, from whispers on the airwaves. We have traveled from simple suspicion to a complex, all-encompassing worldview in which humanity is not the victim of blind fate or external aggression, but the object of a monstrous, cold-blooded betrayal. We see the strings. We see the choreography. We see the puppet masters, both terrestrial and perhaps celestial. But what now? What do we do with this knowledge? This is where the investigation ends and something else entirely begins. Something much heavier. The age of tragic knowledge begins. Tragic knowledge is not just possessing information that others hide. It is a state in which knowledge itself becomes a burden. It is the awareness of a truth that does not liberate, but isolates. A truth that does not empower, but takes away hope. It is the knowledge of Cassandra, who saw the future fall of Troy, but whose prophecies no one believed. It is the knowledge of the lone watchman on the wall, who sees the enemy army in the distance but knows that the city behind him is asleep and will not awaken to his cries. We, the few who have walked this path to the end, you, listening to this story, and I, its narrator, are now in that very position. We have left the cozy, warm comfort of Plato's cave and seen the real, blinding, and terrifying light. But we cannot go back and make others believe us. Try to tell this story to an ordinary person, your friend, your colleague, a family member. Tell them about the non-stochastic resonant pattern, about the correlation of 3i Atlas's trajectory with the wow signal, about the hypothetical welcoming committee, What will you see in their eyes? At best, polite bewilderment. At worst, concern for your mental health. They will tell you it sounds like the plot of a bad science fiction movie. They will say you spend too much time on the internet. They will cite Occam's razor. They will say that official science has explained everything. And in their own way, they will be right. Because their reality, the reality constructed by the system, is coherent, logical, and most importantly, comfortable. In their world, space is a beautiful but distant place. Governments, however flawed, generally care for their citizens. And anomalies are just work for scientists, not harbingers of the apocalypse. To accept our version, they would have to abandon all of that. They would have to admit that the world they live in is an illusion, that the institutions they trust are betrayers, that the very sky above their heads is a screen behind which the drama of their destruction is unfolding. The human psyche has powerful defense mechanisms against such knowledge. Denial is not a sign of foolishness. It is a survival instinct. And so, a sense of the deepest existential isolation is born. We live in the same world as everyone else. We go to the same stores, sit in the same traffic jams, watch the same news. But we see it differently. We look at a clear blue sky and see an invisible wound in the magnetosphere. We hear a news report about another satellite communication failure and understand that it might be another phase of the weapon's calibration. We see the launch of the Hera mission presented as a triumph of science, and we see the departure of a ship carrying traitors. We live in two realities at once, the shared, illusory one, and our own, tragic one. And this rift, this cognitive dissonance becomes our constant companion. This knowledge also carries with it an immense responsibility. If we are right, then we bear a burden that is impossible to carry. What should we do? Shout in the town squares? We would be arrested and sent to a mental institution. Try to hack servers and publish the real data? We would be branded as cyber terrorists? Attempt some act of violence to awaken the people? We would only confirm in the eyes of the system and society that people like us are dangerous lunatics who need to be isolated. Any direct aggressive action on our part would be immediately used against us. The system has perfectly constructed its defense. It is won not by force, but by creating a reality in which any alternative viewpoint automatically becomes marginal and self-destructive. We find ourselves in a paradoxical situation. We possess what may be the most important knowledge in human history, yet we are utterly powerless to change anything. Our knowledge is not a key that unlocks the door to salvation. It is merely a window through which we can watch the approaching catastrophe, unable to even knock on the glass. And the world goes on with its life. The news discusses the latest political scandals, oil prices, sports records. People plan vacations, buy new phones, worry about their mortgages. The contrast between the banality of their concerns and the grandeur of the drama unfolding behind the scenes creates an almost surreal, dizzying sensation. Sometimes one wants to envy them, to envy their ignorance, their blissful slumber, because their world, though an illusion, is at least livable. Our world, the world of tragic knowledge, is a cold, sterile observation chamber with no exit. But the most terrible thing about this knowledge is not the powerlessness or the isolation. The most terrible thing is that it poisons the future. We can no longer look at the stars with awe and hope. We see in them only a cold, indifferent void, or worse, the eyes of hunters. We can no longer believe in progress as an unconditional good. We see how our own technologies can be used for our own enslavement. We can no longer hope for wise leaders or saviors of humanity. We see only cynical calculation and betrayal. Our knowledge has robbed us of a future. It has replaced it with a countdown. Now that we know, what are we to do with this knowledge? We cannot fight. We cannot convince. We cannot escape. What is left for us? Perhaps the only thing we have is the act of bearing witness itself. We cannot stop the steamroller, but we can write down its license plate number. We can, until the very end, until the last minute, keep our chronicle. Collect the data. Connect the dots. Preserve this story. Not for this world, but perhaps for some future one. For the archaeologists who, one day, thousands of years from now, will be excavating the ruins of our civilization and trying to understand what happened. Perhaps our chronicle, saved on some protected medium, will become for them the Rosetta Stone that helps them decipher the greatest betrayal in history. It is not the most heroic role, the role of a memory keeper, the role of a silent witness at a trial where the verdict has already been rendered. But perhaps it is the only dignified role left to us. We see the strings, we see the choreography, but the puppet master remains in the shadows. And the most terrifying question is not, what happens next? But are we next on his stage? No. We are already on the stage. We are just the characters who have realized they are in a tragedy but must play their parts to the end, because the curtain will only fall when the protagonist, whom we thought we were, is dead. And there will be no applause. There will only be silence. The very great silence we so feared, and which, as it turns out, we prepared for ourselves.